Now we're going to be shaping the loaves. This is the most challenging part and arguably the place I'm most likely to mess up, but it's also kind of fun. So a couple of different things. We used water before to keep things from sticking. We've cleared that off for any debris. I'm using just the smallest amount of flour possible. Now, we're going to try, like I said, this can be pretty tricky, especially because I'm using such a wet dough. There's a lot more moisture in this dough than you probably will be doing, especially when you start out. So you can see this is not pretty. I'm trying once again not to degas it unnecessarily, but what I need to do is flip this so I can do the shaping. And make sure there's just enough dough, just enough flour that things aren't sticking here, but we want to make sure that the dough is able to stick to itself so it can be integrated. So there are a few different ways people shape them. This has proven to be about the most reliable for me. And again, I'm not as experienced as a lot of the people who are weighing in the YouTube, etc. But this seems to be working pretty well for me. What I want to do here is set that aside. And later on, we'll be putting it up here, probably, maybe not. We may not need to because the room's actually a little warmer than it often is. So it'll work for us. Now you notice I don't have much flour, but it's just enough to provide a little tiny bit of a film that can help, I hope, help me to lift this very wet dough up. This is where a good dough scraper can make a world of difference. I'm really glad I have this good one here.
How long did you let the dough sit?
The dough's been sitting for probably about 20 minutes. Now, I'm not wanting to put flour in this because I want to make sure it doesn't keep from sticking to itself. We don't want it to stick to me, we don't want it to stick to the counter, but we do want it to stick to itself so that there aren't big holes. When I was first learning how to do this, sometimes I fouled up and used too much flour in this process, and then I ended up actually with holes, kind of long, they call them tunnels, but I ended up with some kind of long holes running through. So I hope this is starting to become a little more clear. Simple Sourdough, their channel they do a beautiful job of describing how to shape loaves. I think that's probably the best channel I've ever seen on shaping. I'd strongly recommend it to anybody who's looking seriously. Once again, folding it up like a diaper, like this. You want to just stretch it enough so you don't tear it, but the stretching actually helps things to keep it shaped. We're going to come back to this. Now I want to point also, see how these are falling? Part of it's because it's such high moisture. We're going to compensate for that later on. So I'm pulling it again, bringing it out. In this case, kind of rolling it together. It's a reason I don't want to have much flour on that. I'm rolling it together, and I'm adding a little bit of pressure, a little bit of tension, pushing it aside. One more. Once again, just a little bit of flour can help with this process, but be really careful not to do too much. Think of it like folding up a diaper. Of course, that's a little disgusting when you're thinking about food, but that still might work for you. We're trying to add some tension, adding some tension as we roll things aside. Now, you'll see I've got this board. In the perfect world, I'd have a nice big pastry board. You've probably noticed if you go on YouTube, professional bakers and much more dedicated bakers than I will often have really large boards. These boards do two things. As I mentioned before, they do have some insulated properties, so they help keep the temperature, the room temperature, and not colder like this often can be. But it also adds some tension, makes it easier to have some resistance here. Now I'm gonna, these are pretty damp. I'll show you what I normally do. I'll show you how I typically handle this. I'm going to ball this up just a little bit more. Like I said, this isn't pretty. It's not something I ever wanted to have recorded, but it should work okay. You can see that somebody could actually shape this entirely again if they wanted to, but that's more than I want to do right now for a couple of reasons. I'll set this aside. I'll do the same thing with these guys. Just get them up here on the board. And then I'll show you how we get them into the basket, where the proofing will finish and where they'll prepare to be baked. I have 4 different baskets here. 2 of these are rattan baskets with cloth liners. And you can see that I've sprinkled in a mixture of brown rice flour and whole wheat flour. What this does, because it acts as a barrier, so that when you're doing the baking, the loaves don't get stuck to it. Now, again, these are very wet loaves, and those have some big advantages. What I'm doing right now, and you'll see I do it a little bit differently for these 2, you'll see what I'm doing is kind of letting gravity help me to get more tension, and then I'm stitching the loaf together. That's a term they use at Simple Sourdough's trainings. They call it stitching the loaf together, using the stickiness to hold it. And that's going to give it more tension. You're going to see that pay off tomorrow. Now in this case, what I'll do, when I say tomorrow, it's because we're going to let these sit overnight in the fridge to continue to proof, to develop more flavor, and then we'll be baking them in the morning. So that's what I did with a round one. With these oblong, I do it just a little bit differently. Oh boy, that's a wet loaf. Maybe a little more than I was prepared to handle. Once again, I let gravity help me out as I put that in there. And then I stitch it, adding tension, increasing the shape of the loaf. And that does make a difference. We're not wanting to knock much air out of this at all, but we are wanting to add some tension to the loaf. I'm going to bring a little more of this mixture, brown rice and whole wheat flour, and I'm going to sprinkle that along here to assure that we don't get stuck as we're unloading that loaf in the morning, loading it into the pans for baking. So we'll repeat that process again. These are another kind. I really like these. These are made by a company called Flourside, and I saw these online a couple of times. Actually, Flourside is hard to get. Their baskets, they're made out of pulp, wood pulp, but they really are fantastic. They don't require a liner. They don't require as much stuff in them. Let me get flour go off my hands. Doesn't require as much stuff in them because it pulls a little bit of the moisture out of it, just the right amount. Really like these. They're tough to get. Flourside often is out of product because they're in such high demand. They just happened to send me an email yesterday that they're going to be taking orders tomorrow. So that's October 31st. Maybe you'll be able to get some for yourself. So I'm using the same stitching together process. You can see that it's forming some additional tension, which gives the loaf more shape, and it prepares for better bubbles inside. I'm going to use a little more of that mixture. Remember, this is about 50-50 brown rice and whole wheat flour. This won't interfere at all. You don't want to do it too heavily. That'd make it kind of messy. This is also going to help so that when I put them in the grocery bags, the plastic bags in the fridge, that'll keep them from sticking to the surface. You see how that's working really nicely? One more loaf. And like the other one, the other oblong loaf, I have to use a little flour there. I'm going to try to collect it up and let gravity help me make it kind of like a big hot dog bun, at least to begin with. And then we'll pull in and stitch together the length of the loaf. I may have used a little bit too much flour on that dough scraper. because that's interfering with sticking just a little bit. I can feel the difference. So once again, that stitching process, mine's not very pretty. Take a look at Simple Sourdough's website. I think you'll really like those, and I'm sure there are others who are doing it too. Same process, making sure that we protect things from getting stuck. But like I said, these flour side containers made of wood pulp are fantastic at not sticking. I really like these and would like to get some more. Hint, hint, hint. Anyway, so I'm going to put these in plastic bags, and they're going to go down in the fridge overnight, and then tomorrow we'll bake them. Oh, Ruth was reminding me some people will actually use shower caps. So if you frequently go to hotels where they have shower caps, I have no idea where those would be. Some people will actually use not used shower caps, thank you, but they'll actually use shower caps because they do a nice job of holding down with the elastic, and the plastic is enough to hold the moisture in. We don't want these drying out and developing a skin while they're sitting in the fridge overnight. So I'm going to use grocery bags, and maybe you can get some cheap line on some shower caps.